The sharp crack of skin meeting skin echoed through the marble courthouse halls. Rebecca Matthews stood frozen, 7 months pregnant, her hand pressed to her stinging cheek. The courtroom gasped as Vanessa Sterling's diamond bracelet caught the light, her manicured hand still hovering in the air. "That's what you get for ruining my life, you pathetic cow," the millionaire's mistress hissed. But what happened next would change everything. Because sometimes, your lowest moment becomes the launching pad for your greatest transformation. Sometimes, the woman who slaps you in court becomes the reason you discover just how powerful you really are. This is the story of Rebecca Matthews, a woman who thought she knew her husband, a woman who thought she understood her marriage, a woman who was about to discover that everything she believed about her life was a carefully constructed lie. In the next 90 minutes, you'll witness a pregnant wife's journey from victim to victor. You'll see how a public humiliation became a private revelation, and you'll discover what happens when a woman finally stops apologizing for taking up space in her own life. But I have to warn you, this story contains truths that might make you uncomfortable. Revelations that might make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and what happens when money tries to buy its way out of consequences. So if you're ready to hear about the day that changed Rebecca's life forever, settle in. Because this is a story about justice, dignity, and the moment when a woman discovers that she's stronger than everyone told her she was. Chapter 1. The slap that changed everything. The sharp crack of skin meeting skin echoed through the marble courthouse halls. Rebecca Matthews stood frozen, her hand pressed to her stinging cheek, 7 months pregnant and trembling. The courtroom gasped. Vanessa Sterling's diamond bracelet caught the fluorescent light as her manicured hand hovered in the air. "That's what you get for ruining my life, you pathetic cow," Vanessa hissed. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then something shifted in the room. Judge Patricia Hamilton's gavel came down like thunder. "Bailiff, arrest that woman for assault." "What?" Vanessa's voice pitched higher. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who my father is?" "I know who you are," Judge Hamilton said, her voice ice cold. "You're the woman who just committed assault in my courtroom." The bailiff moved toward Vanessa. She backed away, her face twisting with rage. "This is insane. She's the one who ruined everything. If she'd just signed the divorce papers quietly, none of this would have happened." Rebecca's trembling hands automatically went to her belly, the universal protective gesture every pregnant woman knows. Her baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the chaos. 2 bailiffs flanked Vanessa now. She looked around the courtroom desperately, seeking support. Her eyes landed on David Matthews, Rebecca's husband. He sat pale and silent, his expensive legal team whispering frantically beside him. "David," Vanessa called out, tell them how she's been making our lives hell." David opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once in his life, the millionaire tech entrepreneur had nothing to say. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the female bailiff said gently but firmly. Vanessa jerked away from her touch. "Don't you dare put your hands on me. I'll have all your jobs. My father owns half of Silicon Valley." Judge Hamilton stood slowly. At 55, she had the bearing of someone who had seen every trick in the book. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her dark eyes missed nothing. "Miss Sterling," the judge said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent courtroom. "In my 23 years on the bench, I have seen many things, but I have never seen a woman assault a pregnant wife during divorce proceedings. You will be charged with assault." The courtroom erupted. Reporters in the back row frantically scribbled notes. David's parents, who had been sitting in stony silence, began arguing in hushed whispers. Margaret O'Brien, Rebecca's divorce attorney, placed a protective hand on her client's shoulder. As the bailiffs led Vanessa away, she turned back to Rebecca with pure venom in her eyes. "This isn't over," she snarled. "David will never choose you over me. Look at yourself, fat, pathetic, clinging to a man who doesn't want you." Each word hit Rebecca like a physical blow. For months, she had heard these exact thoughts echoing in her own mind. The cruel voice that whispered she was not enough, never enough, that she should be grateful for whatever scraps of affection David threw her way. But something strange happened. Instead of crumbling under Vanessa's attack, Rebecca stood straighter. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and she felt a spark of something she had not experienced in months. Power. The bailiff whispered something in Judge Hamilton's ear that made the judge's face go white. Rebecca caught fragments of the conversation. Security cameras caught everything. Your Honor, multiple angles. And there's something else. Judge Hamilton's eyes found Rebecca's across the courtroom. Something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, respect. Mrs. Matthews, the judge said, her voice gentler now. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? Rebecca touched her cheek. It throbbed where Vanessa's rings had scraped the skin, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. I need justice, Your Honor. The judge nodded slowly. Then let's make sure you get it. The courtroom began to empty, but Rebecca remained seated. The events of the last few minutes felt surreal. This morning, she had been just another pregnant wife going through a messy divorce. Now, she was the victim of an assault that would be plastered across every local news channel by evening. Maggie squeezed her shoulder. How are you feeling? Honey. Rebecca looked around the courtroom one more time. At the American flag hanging motionless in the still air, at the empty jury box with its worn wooden seats, at the witness stand where so many people had sworn to tell the truth. Different, she said finally. I feel different. And she did. For the first time in 7 months, since discovering David's affair, since learning about the secret credit cards and hidden bank accounts, since realizing her marriage was a carefully constructed lie, Rebecca Matthews felt like she might survive this. More than survive, she might actually win. Chapter 2. Before the storm 3 hours earlier, Rebecca had sat in her Honda Civic in the courthouse parking lot, unable to move. 3 deep breaths. Check phone. Lock. Unlock. Lock. The ritual she had performed every morning since finding David's text messages 6 weeks ago. Messages that left no doubt about what he was doing, about who he was doing it with, about how long it had been going on. The phone showed no new messages. David had not contacted her since their last screaming match 3 days ago. The silence felt heavier than his lies. A tap on the passenger window made her jump. Maggie O'Brien stood outside, her red hair whipping in the October wind. Rebecca unlocked the door, and her best friend slid into the passenger seat. Honey, we've been through this, Maggie said, immediately reading Rebecca's panic. Today is just preliminary motions. David's team will posture. Everyone goes home. No drama. His mother will be there, Rebecca whispered. Helen Matthews can kiss my Irish ass, Maggie replied, making Rebecca smile for the first time in weeks. Margaret O'Brien had been Rebecca's friend since law school. While Rebecca had chosen corporate law, Maggie had specialized in family court. She had seen it all: cheating husbands, hidden assets, custody battles that tore families apart. But she had never seen a case that made her as angry as Rebecca's. Did you eat breakfast? Maggie asked. Rebecca shook her head. Food had become an enemy lately. Everything tasted like cardboard, and her stomach stayed in constant knots. The baby needs nutrients, Maggie said gently. Whatever happens in there, you're still growing a little person. Rebecca's hand went to her belly automatically. At 7 months, the pregnancy was impossible to hide. Her baby boy kicked constantly now, as if he sensed the tension surrounding his arrival into the world. Maggie, Rebecca said slowly, what if David's right? What if I am losing my mind? The memory flooding began without warning. Rebecca remembered the day she had told David about the pregnancy. They had been married for 5 years, trying for a baby for 2. She had bought a tiny pair of booties and hidden them in his briefcase. When he found them, his face had fallen for just a split second before the fake smile appeared. Perfect timing, he had said, but his eyes had shown something else entirely. Trapped panic. She had pushed down her doubts then, made excuses, told herself she was imagining things. But now, knowing what she knew about Vanessa Sterling, that moment made perfect sense. You're not losing your mind, Maggie said firmly. You're having a normal response to discovering your husband is a lying, cheating piece of garbage. Rebecca's validation whisper came out as barely a breath. I'm not crazy. I saw what I saw in his eyes that day. Maggie's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression darkened. What? Rebecca asked. Those bastards, Maggie muttered. then launched into a string of creative Irish profanity that would have made a sailor blush. "Maggie, what is it? David's lawyer just filed an emergency motion. They're claiming you're mentally unstable due to pregnancy hormones. They want a psychological evaluation before any custody arrangements are discussed." The words hit Rebecca like ice water. She had known David was ruthless in business, but this felt like a new level of cruelty. "Can they do that?" "They can try," Maggie said grimly. "But Judge Hamilton doesn't suffer fools gladly. She'll see right through this garbage." Rebecca stared at the courthouse entrance. Lawyers and clients streamed up the wide stone steps, all of them fighting their own battles, all of them hoping for justice in a system that felt increasingly stacked against people like her. "He's going to take my baby away, isn't he?" she whispered. "Over my dead body," Maggie replied. "Rebecca, listen to me. David Matthews is about to learn that his money can't buy him everything. Not in Patricia Hamilton's courtroom." They sat in silence for a moment, watching other people's dramas unfold. A young couple arguing near the courthouse steps. An older man in an expensive suit talking rapidly into his phone. Two women consoling each other near the parking meters. "Ready?" Maggie asked. Rebecca took one more deep breath. The baby kicked against her ribs, a reminder that she was not fighting just for herself anymore. "Ready." They walked across the parking lot together, Rebecca's hand instinctively resting on her belly. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and approaching winter. By the time her baby was born in January, her entire life would be different. She just had no idea how different. The courthouse loomed before them, its granite columns and marble steps speaking of justice and permanence. Rebecca had always found courthouses intimidating, even as a lawyer. There was something about the weight of all the decisions made within those walls. All the lives changed, all the families broken and rebuilt. Today, she would become part of that history. As they climbed the courthouse steps, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from her doctor. "Appointment reminder, check up tomorrow at 10 a.m. Remember to bring your partner if possible for ultrasound." Partner. As if David would show up. He had missed the last 3 appointments, always with some urgent business excuse. Now she knew the real reason. He had been too busy planning his exit strategy. "You okay?" Maggie asked, and noticing her expression. "Fine," Rebecca lied. "Let's get this over with." Neither of them had any idea that in less than 3 hours, Rebecca's entire world would change forever. Chapter 3. The Courtroom Circus. The family courtroom felt like a theater designed for breaking hearts. High ceilings with ornate molding, dark wood paneling that had witnessed decades of family disputes. Rows of gallery seats where people's lives were put on display for all to see. The American flag hung motionless in the corner, a reminder that justice was supposed to be blind. Rebecca entered to find David already seated with his legal team. 3 sharks in expensive suits, their briefcases open and papers spread across the table like battle plans. But it was the woman beside him that stole Rebecca's breath. Vanessa Sterling looked like she had stepped off the cover of a magazine. Blonde hair in a perfect chignon, a designer dress that probably cost more than Rebecca's monthly grocery budget. She wore the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money or consequences. She was everything Rebecca was not. Thin where Rebecca was round with pregnancy, polished where Rebecca felt frayed and exhausted, young and fresh where Rebecca felt ancient at 32. Vanessa caught Rebecca staring and smiled. It was not a kind smile. David did not look up from his papers. Her husband of 5 years, the father of her unborn child, could not even meet her eyes. "Breathe," Maggie whispered beside her. Rebecca tried to focus on something else. Anything else. The court reporter's fingers dancing across her machine. Emily Walsh. Rebecca remembered from previous hearings. A kind woman with gentle eyes who always nodded encouragingly at nervous witnesses. The bailiff called the court to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hamilton." Judge Hamilton entered like a force of nature. At 55, she commanded respect without saying a word. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her dark eyes missed nothing as they swept the courtroom. She had the bearing of someone who had built her career in a male-dominated field and had zero tolerance for games. She was exactly what Rebecca had hoped for. Someone who would see through David's charm and expensive lawyers. Someone who would care about justice more than politics or money. "Be seated," Judge Hamilton said. Her voice carried easily through the courtroom without seeming loud. "This is preliminary hearing number 4789 in the matter of Matthews versus Matthews." David's lead attorney stood. A man who probably charged more per hour than Rebecca used to make in a month. "Your Honor, before we proceed with the scheduled motions, my client has filed an emergency petition regarding the mental stability of the respondent." Rebecca felt the words like a physical blow. Around her, the courtroom seemed to shift and blur. The panic cleaning she had done last night, the 3 a.m. Google searches about custody laws, the way she checked her phone obsessively, hoping for some sign that David still cared. Maybe she was losing her mind. The breathing room came automatically. Rebecca forced herself to focus on the courtroom details. The American flag's gentle sway under the air conditioning, the soft clicking of Emily Walsh's fingers on her court reporting machine, the smell of old wood and new fear. Judge Hamilton's expression had turned glacial. "On what grounds, Counselor?" "Pregnancy-induced psychological instability. Your Honor, my client is concerned that Mrs. Matthews is not capable of making rational decisions regarding custody arrangements or property division at this time. Pregnancy hormones. As if everything she felt, every legitimate concern about her husband's behavior, could be dismissed as the irrational thoughts of a pregnant woman." Rebecca felt herself fragmenting. Was she overreacting? Had the long nights of wondering and worrying actually driven her to some kind of breakdown? But then she remembered finding David's credit card statements, the charges at expensive restaurants she had never been to, the hotel bills, the jewelry purchases she had never received. She was not imagining any of this. "And does your client have any medical evidence to support this claim?" Judge Hamilton asked, her voice deadly quiet. "We are requesting a court-ordered psychological evaluation." "Your Honor." The courtroom fell silent except for the soft whir of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. Rebecca could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Judge Hamilton turned her attention to Maggie. "Counselor O'Brien, your response." Maggie stood slowly. Rebecca had seen her friend in court before, but never like this. There was something different about her posture, something dangerous. "Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to delay proceedings while my client's husband continues to hide marital assets. There is no medical evidence of any psychological instability. Mrs. Matthews is a former corporate attorney who has been nothing but cooperative throughout these proceedings. Has your client sought any mental health treatment during her pregnancy?" "Standard prenatal counseling, Your Honor. Nothing beyond the norm for a woman dealing with an unfaithful spouse and impending divorce." Rebecca caught sight of David's parents in the gallery. James Matthews looked uncomfortable. His weathered face creased with disapproval. Helen Matthews, on the other hand, kept shooting sympathetic glances toward Vanessa, as if the other woman was somehow the victim in all this. The peak emotional moment came when David's lawyer began reading from the motion. "The respondent has exhibited erratic behavior, including obsessive monitoring of the petitioner's activities, emotional outbursts, and an inability to engage in rational discourse about the dissolution of the marriage." Each word felt like a slap. Obsessive monitoring. As if checking up on her cheating husband was somehow unreasonable. Emotional outbursts. As if anger was not a natural response to betrayal. Inability to engage in rational discourse. As if she was the one being unreasonable. Rebecca's hands trembled in her lap. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was losing her grip on reality. The way she had reorganized the kitchen cabinets at 2 a.m. last week, unable to sleep, needing to control something in her chaotic world. The way she had called David's office 6 times in one day, knowing he would not answer but needing to hear his voice. But then Vanessa Sterling stood up. It happened so suddenly that Emily Walsh stopped typing mid-sentence. The entire courtroom turned to watch as Vanessa rose from her seat beside David, her face twisted with rage. "This is all your fault," she snarled at Rebecca, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "If you just signed the papers quietly, none of this would be happening." She stepped into the aisle, moving toward Rebecca with purpose. Judge Hamilton's gavel came down once, sharply. "Miss Sterling, return to your seat immediately." But Vanessa was beyond hearing. Months of frustration and entitlement boiled over as she approached Rebecca's table. "You're pathetic," she continued, her voice rising. "Clinging to a man who doesn't want you, making everyone's life miserable because you can't accept reality. David half rose from his seat. Vanessa, sit down. But it was too late. Vanessa Sterling, daughter of millionaire Robert Sterling, mistress of tech entrepreneur David Matthews, had reached Rebecca's table, and her manicured hand was already rising. The slap came without warning. Chapter 4. Aftermath and Revelations. Chaos erupted in the marble courthouse. The sharp crack of the skin meeting skin hung in the air like a gunshot. Rebecca's head snapped to the side, her hand flying instinctively to her stinging cheek. Vanessa Sterling stood over her, diamond bracelet glittering, chest heaving with rage. For a moment, the entire courtroom held its breath. Then Judge Hamilton's gavel came down like thunder. "Bailiff, arrest that woman for assault," Vanessa screamed as the female bailiff moved toward her. "Do you know who my father is? I'll have all your jobs." "I don't care if your father owns half of Silicon Valley," Judge Hamilton replied, her voice cold as winter steel. "In my courtroom, we follow the law." The bailiff reached for Vanessa's arm. She jerked away, her perfect composure completely shattered. "This is insane. She's the one who ruined everything. Look at her, sitting there playing the victim." Rebecca's hand went to her cheek where Vanessa's rings had scraped the skin. Every woman in that courtroom knew this feeling. The sting of public humiliation, the burn of being attacked when vulnerable, the shame that came not from anything you had done, but from someone else's inability to control themselves. But something else happened, something Rebecca had not expected. Instead of crumbling under the attack, she stood straighter. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to the chaos, as if telling her to fight back, to stand up, to stop apologizing for existing. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," the second bailiff said, moving to flank Vanessa. "Don't you dare touch me," Vanessa shrieked, backing toward David's table. "David, tell them how she's been stalking us." All eyes turned to David Matthews, the millionaire tech entrepreneur who commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals, the man who had charmed his way through 5 years of marriage while secretly planning his escape. He sat frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "David," Vanessa called again, desperation creeping into her voice. David started, then stopped. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he had nothing to say. His father, James Matthews, stood up in the gallery. At 65, he still carried himself like the military officer he had once been. His face was flushed with anger, but not at Rebecca. "Sit down, son," he said quietly. "You've done enough damage." Helen Matthews tugged at her husband's sleeve. "James, please, this is not the time." "When is the time, Helen?" James shot back. "When our son's pregnant wife has been assaulted in open court." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters in the back rows scribbled frantically. Cell phone cameras appeared despite the bailiff's efforts to stop them. Vanessa realized she was losing the room. Her voice pitched higher, more desperate. "You don't understand. She's been making our lives hell for months, following us, calling David's office, showing up places uninvited." Rebecca found her voice for the first time since the slap. "I followed my husband to one restaurant," she said clearly, "to confirm what I already knew, that he was cheating on me while I carried his child." The simple dignity of her response cut through Vanessa's hysteria like a blade. Judge Hamilton called for order, but her eyes never left Rebecca's face. There was something in the judge's expression that Rebecca could not quite read. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. "Miss Sterling," Judge Hamilton said as the bailiffs finally reached her, "you are under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." "This isn't over," Vanessa snarled as they led her away. "David will never choose you over me. Look at yourself, fat, pathetic, clinging to a man who doesn't want you." Each word was designed to wound, to cut deep into the insecurities that Rebecca had carried throughout her pregnancy. The fear that she was not enough, that she never had been enough. But the words bounced off her like rain off glass. Rebecca stood slowly, one hand protectively over her belly. Around her, the courtroom continued its chaos, but she felt strangely calm, clear. Judge Hamilton's gavel came down again, calling for order. "This court will recess for 30 minutes, she announced. "Mrs. Matthews, please remain. I'd like to speak with you in chambers." As the courtroom began to empty, Rebecca caught sight of Emily Walsh, the court reporter. The younger woman gave her an encouraging nod, her eyes bright with something like admiration. Even some of the lawyers looked disgusted by what they had witnessed. A pregnant woman assaulted in court was beyond the pale, even in the often ugly world of family law. Maggie squeezed Rebecca's shoulder. "How are you feeling, honey?" Rebecca touched her cheek again. It throbbed where Vanessa's rings had made contact, but the pain felt distant, unimportant compared to the clarity she suddenly felt. "Different," she said. "I feel different." And she did. For months, she had felt like a victim, like someone things happened to rather than someone who made things happen. She had apologized for her husband's betrayal, blamed herself for not being enough to keep him faithful, accepted that somehow his choices were her fault. But standing in that courtroom, with the sting of Vanessa's assault still fresh on her cheek, Rebecca Matthews felt something she had not experienced in months. Power. Judge Hamilton was gathering her papers, preparing to leave the bench, but before she did, she looked directly at Rebecca. "Mrs. Matthews," she said, her voice carrying across the nearly empty courtroom. "Are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "I need justice, Your Honor." The judge nodded slowly, and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition of strength in the face of humiliation. "Then let's make sure you get it." As Judge Hamilton disappeared through the door behind the bench, Rebecca allowed herself a moment to process what had just happened. She had been assaulted by her husband's mistress in open court. It should have been the most humiliating moment of her life. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something new, something that belonged entirely to her. Chapter 5. The Judge's Chambers. Judge Patricia Hamilton's chambers felt like a sanctuary after the chaos of the courtroom. Dark wood bookcases lined the walls, filled with legal texts and bound court decisions. A large window overlooked the courthouse parking lot, where Rebecca could see people hurrying about their daily business, unaware that her world had just shifted on its axis. The judge poured Rebecca a glass of water with steady hands. At 55, Patricia Hamilton moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent 23 years navigating the treacherous waters of family court. "I've been on the bench for 23 years, Judge Hamilton said, settling behind her desk. "I've seen it all. Custody battles that destroy children. Financial disputes that bankrupt families. But what happened out there?" She shook her head. "In all my years, I have never seen a woman assault a pregnant wife during divorce proceedings." Rebecca sipped the water gratefully. Her throat felt dry and raw, as if she had been screaming, though she could barely remember speaking at all. "Your Honor, I know how this looks," she began. "Pregnant woman, emotional, making scenes. Mrs. Matthews, stop." Judge Hamilton's voice was gentle but firm. "You were assaulted in my courtroom. The only person who should be embarrassed is the one wearing handcuffs." The deep vulnerability layer began to crack open inside Rebecca's chest. For months, she had held herself together through sheer force of will, kept working until David convinced her to quit, kept smiling at family gatherings even as her marriage crumbled, kept making excuses for behavior that had no excuse. But sitting in the quiet dignity of the judge's chambers, Rebecca's composure finally began to fracture. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered, the words spilling out like water through a broken dam. 6 months ago, I was a successful corporate lawyer. I had my own clients, my own cases. I was good at what I did. She paused, one hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked restlessly. Now I'm 7 months pregnant, unemployed, and my husband is flaunting his girlfriend in court while claiming I'm mentally unstable. Judge Hamilton leaned forward, her dark eyes intent. "Tell me about your legal background." Rebecca found herself talking about law school, the late nights in the library, surviving on coffee and determination, the thrill of her first courtroom victory in a complex corporate dispute, the satisfaction of building cases from nothing, finding the thread of logic that would unravel her opponent's arguments. The woman she used to be before she let David convince her that staying home was better for the family, before she started measuring her worth by his approval, before she became someone who happened to instead of someone who made things happen. As she spoke, something shifted in Judge Hamilton's expression. Interest, recognition, the look of one legal mind recognizing another. What kind of corporate law? The judge asked. Contract disputes, mostly. Some intellectual property work. I specialized in cases where the facts were complicated, but the law was clear. David used to say I had a gift for making complex situations simple. Rebecca's validation whisper came out stronger than she had intended. I was good at my job. I was really good. That version of me still exists somewhere. Judge Hamilton was quiet for a long moment, studying Rebecca's face. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, heading towards some other crisis in the city. Mrs. Matthews, the judge said finally, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Rebecca nodded, suddenly nervous. If you could do anything right now, anything at all, what would it be? The question caught Rebecca off guard. For months, her entire focus had been on survival, getting through the divorce, protecting her unborn child, finding a way to rebuild her life from the ashes of her marriage. But what did she actually want? I want to help people, she said slowly. I want to use my legal training to help women who are going through what I'm going through, women who feel like the system is stacked against them. Judge Hamilton nodded. And why family law instead of returning to corporate practice? Rebecca thought about the morning's events, the way David's expensive lawyers had tried to paint her as mentally unstable simply for reacting normally to betrayal, the casual cruelty of using her pregnancy against her, the assumption that money and connections could override basic human decency. Because corporate law is about protecting money, she said, family law is about protecting people. The judge stood and walked to the window, her back to Rebecca. The silence stretched, but it did not feel uncomfortable. It felt like something important was being considered. Mrs. Matthews, Judge Hamilton said without turning around, my judicial clerk just gave notice. She's moving to Denver with her husband next month. Rebecca's heart began to pound, though she was not entirely sure why. The position requires a law degree, sharp analytical skills, and the ability to handle difficult situations with grace under pressure. The judge turned back to face her. It also requires someone who understands that justice is not always about winning. Sometimes it's about finding the path that causes the least harm to the most vulnerable people involved. The baby kicked hard against Rebecca's ribs, as if sensing the importance of this moment. Your Honor, Rebecca said carefully, are you offering me a job? Judge Hamilton returned to her desk, her expression thoughtful. I'm offering you an opportunity. The irony is not lost on me that your husband's mistress just assaulted you in the same courtroom where you could potentially work. Rebecca's mind raced. A job, a real job, using her legal training. Not corporate law, which had never truly satisfied her, but family law, helping other women navigate the system that often seemed designed to protect everyone except those who needed protection most. The position would start immediately, Judge Hamilton continued. The pay is decent, though not what you're probably used to from private practice. The hours can be long, but the work, she paused, the work matters. Outside the chambers, Rebecca could hear voices in the hallway. David arguing with his lawyers, his parents having their own heated discussion, the machinery of the legal system grinding forward, indifferent to the human costs. But in here, in this quiet room with its walls full of wisdom and precedent, Rebecca felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. I would need to think about it, she said, though her heart was already racing with possibility. Of course, Judge Hamilton said. But Mrs. Matthews, don't think too long. Sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as our worst moments. A knock on the door interrupted them. Judge Hamilton's secretary peered in. Your Honor, the Sterling family attorney is here. He's requesting an immediate conference about his client. Judge Hamilton's expression hardened. Tell him he can file a motion like everyone else. Miss Sterling is in custody, and that's where she'll stay until her arraignment. As the secretary withdrew, the judge turned back to Rebecca. Money and connections, she said quietly. They think they can buy their way out of consequences. Sometimes they're right, but not in my courtroom. Rebecca stood slowly, her hand automatically going to her belly. The baby had settled into a quiet rhythm, as if he too was considering the possibilities that lay ahead. "Thank you, Your Honor, for everything. Thank me by thinking about what I've said. And Mrs. Matthews, what happened out there today was not your fault. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As Rebecca reached for the door handle, Judge Hamilton spoke again. "The position I mentioned, it would mean you'd be here every day, in this courthouse, in the same building where you were assaulted. Some people might find that difficult." Rebecca paused, her hand on the cool metal of the door handle. She thought about Vanessa Sterling's twisted face as she delivered that slap, about David's silence when he should have defended her, about months of feeling powerless and afraid. "Your Honor," she said, turning back to face the judge, "I think I'd find it empowering." Judge Hamilton smiled for the first time that day. It transformed her stern features, revealing the woman behind the black robes. "I was hoping you'd say that." As Rebecca opened the door to return to the chaos of the courthouse hallway, she carried with her something she had not possessed when she entered the chambers: a future. And for the first time in months, it belonged entirely to her. Chapter 6. An Unexpected Alliance. The courthouse hallway buzzed with activity as Rebecca emerged from Judge Hamilton's chambers. David paced near the elevator, his expensive lawyer whispering damage control strategies in his ear. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his designer suit looked rumpled. For the first time since she had known him, David Matthews looked rattled. His parents had claimed a bench near the courtroom doors. James Matthews sat with his head in his hands while Helen Matthews dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. The perfect family image they had cultivated for decades was crumbling in real time, but it was the new arrival that caught everyone's attention. Robert Sterling strode through the courthouse entrance like a man accustomed to commanding attention. At 58, Vanessa's father had the silver hair and tailored presence of old money. He was flanked by a crisis management team that looked like they had been pulled away from more important clients. Rebecca watched as they approached David's group, money recognizing money, power gravitating toward power. Maggie appeared at Rebecca's elbow. "How did it go in there?" "Judge Hamilton offered me a job," Rebecca said quietly. Maggie's eyebrows shot up. "What kind of job?" "Judicial clerk, in family court." "Holy hell," Maggie breathed. "Rebecca, do you know what that means? Patricia Hamilton's clerks go on to some of the best positions in family law. She only hires the absolute best." Rebecca's mind was still processing the conversation in chambers. The possibility of using her legal training again, of helping other women navigate the system that often seemed designed to protect everyone except those who needed it most. "I haven't said yes yet," she murmured. "Why the hell not?" Before Rebecca could answer, Robert Sterling's voice carried across the hallway. He was speaking to David in the tone of a man used to solving problems with money. "The situation is contained," he was saying. "My daughter made a mistake, but these things can be managed. We'll need statements from everyone minimizing the incident." David nodded eagerly. "Of course, Mr. Sterling, I'm sure Rebecca understands that emotions were running high." Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. Already they were rewriting history. Already Vanessa's assault was becoming a mistake and an incident that could be managed away. James Matthews stood up from the bench, his military bearing rigid with disapproval. "Contained," he said, his voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "Your daughter assaulted my son's pregnant wife in open court. How exactly do you contain that?" Robert Sterling turned his calculating gaze on the older man. "Mr. Matthews, I understand you're upset, but surely we can all agree that pursuing this matter would be unproductive for everyone involved." The meaning was clear. Money would change hands. Lawyers would be paid. The whole ugly incident would disappear into the legal machinery that protected people like the Sterlings from the consequences of their actions. Rebecca found herself walking toward the group before she consciously decided to move. Maggie hurried to keep up, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Mrs. Matthews," Robert Sterling said as she approached. His smile was perfectly calibrated, neither too warm nor too cold. "I cannot express how sorry I am about my daughter's behavior today. Vanessa has been under tremendous stress." Rebecca stopped a few feet away from the group. David would not meet her eyes. His parents looked uncomfortable but resigned. The crisis management team watched her like scientists observing a potentially dangerous specimen. Stress, Rebecca repeated quietly. Yes, Sterling continued smoothly. The situation has been difficult for everyone involved, but I'm confident we can reach an understanding that serves everyone's best interests. Rebecca's hand went to her belly automatically. The baby kicked against her palm, a reminder of what was at stake. What kind of understanding? She asked. One of Sterling's advisors stepped forward with a briefcase. We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for any medical expenses or emotional distress you may have experienced. Substantial compensation? As if her dignity could be purchased like any other commodity. Rebecca looked around the group, at David, who still could not meet her eyes, at his parents, who looked ashamed but unwilling to rock the boat, at the Sterling team, who had probably handled dozens of similar situations for wealthy families whose children believed consequences were for other people. The memory flooding continued, but this time it was different. Rebecca remembered law school, sitting in Professor Martinez's ethics class. The professor had asked a simple question: what is justice? Some students had talked about following the law. Others had mentioned punishment fitting the crime. But Rebecca had raised her hand and said something that had stuck with her ever since. Justice is what happens when power can't buy its way out of consequences. Now, on standing in the courthouse hallway with her cheek still stinging from Vanessa Sterling's assault, Rebecca understood what Professor Martinez had been trying to teach them. This was the moment. This was when she would discover what justice actually meant to her. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice carrying clearly down the hallway. Your daughter didn't just assault me. She assaulted my unborn child. She did it in front of witnesses, in a court of law, because she felt entitled to do it. Sterling's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes. Mrs. Matthews, I understand you're upset, but surely we can handle this quietly. These situations don't need to become public spectacles. Rebecca felt the anger rising, but it was different from the helpless rage she had carried for months. This was clean anger, focused anger, the kind that led to action rather than despair. You want to handle this quietly so your daughter doesn't face consequences for her actions? She said, so she can continue believing that money and connections make her untouchable. Now see here, one of Sterling's advisors began, but Rebecca continued. I spent months being told I was overreacting, that I was imagining things, that my pregnancy was making me unstable. But I'm not the one who committed assault in open court. David finally looked up. Becca, please, let's just move past this. For the baby's sake. For the baby's sake. The phrase that had been used to manipulate her throughout the entire marriage. Don't travel while pregnant. For the baby's sake. Don't work late. For the baby's sake. Don't ask too many questions about where I've been. For the baby's sake. Rebecca's validation whisper came out strong and clear. I deserve more than hush money. I deserve better than being paid to disappear. The hallway had grown quiet. Other people's conversations had stopped as they sensed the drama unfolding. Court reporters paused their typing. Lawyers turned to watch. Robert Sterling's facade began to crack slightly. Mrs. Matthews, you seem like an intelligent woman. Surely you understand that pursuing charges against my daughter serves no one's interests. It serves justice's interests, Rebecca replied. And that's the only interest I care about right now. Sterling's crisis team exchanged glances. This was not going according to their usual script. Most people, when offered enough money, chose the path of least resistance, but Rebecca was not most people. And as her phone buzzed with an incoming text message, she was about to discover just how deep the rabbit hole of her marriage's deception actually went. The text was from Dr. Sarah Thompson, her OB-GYN. Saw the courthouse footage on the news? Need to tell you something about David's last visit. Can you call me? Rebecca's blood turned to ice as she read the message. Whatever Dr. Thompson needed to tell her, it was serious enough to risk doctor-patient confidentiality. She looked up at the group of men still discussing how to make her disappear quietly from their lives. At David, who was nodding along with whatever Sterling's team was proposing. Her husband had no idea that his carefully constructed world was about to collapse completely. And this time, Rebecca was going to be the one holding the sledgehammer. Chapter 7. The Power Shift. Rebecca excused herself from the circle of men trying to buy her silence and walked to a quiet corner of the courthouse hallway. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed Dr. Thompson's number. The phone rang twice before her doctor's familiar voice answered. "Rebecca, thank God you called. Are you somewhere private?" "As private as I can get in a courthouse hallway." "What's going on?" "Dr. Thompson." There was a pause. Rebecca could hear papers rustling in the background, the sound of a medical office in full swing. "I saw the news footage of what happened today," Dr. Thompson said carefully, "and I realized I can't keep quiet about this anymore. David came to see me 3 weeks ago." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "What do you mean he came to see you?" "He scheduled an appointment without telling you. He wanted me to arrange a paternity test." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. She leaned against the marble wall for support, one hand instinctively going to her belly. "He what?" she whispered. "He claimed he had concerns about the timeline of conception. He wanted me to perform the test during your next ultrasound without your knowledge." Rebecca's mind reeled. Every doctor's appointment David had attended, every time he had placed his hand on her belly and smiled, every "I love you" he had whispered to their unborn son. All of it had been performance. All of it had been lies. "I refuse, of course," Dr. Thompson continued. "I told him that any paternity testing would require your full informed consent. He became quite agitated and accused me of not understanding the legal implications." "Did he say why he thought—" Rebecca couldn't finish the sentence. "He mentioned that the timing was suspicious given your work schedule last spring. He said there were opportunities for you to have been unfaithful during business trips." Business trips. Rebecca remembered those trips clearly. 3 days in Chicago for a corporate merger. 2 days in Portland for a client meeting. She had been working 16-hour days, barely had time to sleep, let alone conduct an affair. But David had been projecting his own behavior onto her. Because he was cheating, he assumed she must be too. "Dr. Thompson, why are you telling me this now?" "Because after what I saw on the news today, I realize that man doesn't deserve your protection. What kind of husband allows his mistress to assault his pregnant wife? What kind of father doubts his own child's parentage?" Rebecca closed her eyes, absorbing the full weight of David's betrayal. It wasn't just the affair with Vanessa. It wasn't just the hidden assets and secret credit cards. He had never believed the baby was his. Every tender moment had been a lie. Every expression of excitement about becoming a father had been an act. Her deepest truth moment arrived with crystal clarity. David never believed the baby was his. He had been going through the motions of a loving husband while harboring the devastating suspicion that she had been unfaithful. When Rebecca opened her eyes, she saw David across the hallway, still deep in conversation with Robert Sterling's team. He was nodding and gesturing, probably agreeing to whatever arrangement they were proposing. He had no idea that his secret had just been exposed. Rebecca walked back toward the group with a strange sense of calm. The transformed power layer was beginning to take hold. She was no longer the victim in this story. She was no longer the woman things happened to. She was the woman who was about to make things happen. "David!" she called out as she approached. He looked up, and for a moment, his expression was almost hopeful, as if he thought she was coming to agree to Sterling's terms. "Dr. Thompson called," she said simply. The color drained from David's face so quickly that Rebecca thought he might faint. Around him, the Sterling crisis team continued their conversation, unaware that the entire dynamic had just shifted. "Becca, I can explain," David began. "Explain what?" Rebecca's voice was calm, controlled. "Explain that you've spent 7 months pretending to be excited about our baby while secretly believing I cheated on you." The hallway conversation stopped. James and Helen Matthews looked up sharply. Even Robert Sterling's advisors paused their scheming to listen. "That's not... I was just..." David's famous composure, the smooth confidence that had built his tech empire, crumbled before everyone's eyes. "You scheduled a paternity test behind my back," Rebecca continued, her voice carrying clearly down the marble hallway. "You told our doctor that you had concerns about the timeline of conception?" Helen Matthews gasped audibly. James Matthews stood up slowly, his face darkening with rage. "You did what?" James's voice could have cut glass. "Dad, you don't understand," David started. "I understand that you're my son, and I raised you better than this." James exploded. You scheduled a paternity test behind your wife's back while she's carrying your child. The timeline was suspicious, David tried to explain. The timeline was suspicious. Rebecca's calm began to crack slightly. You mean the timeline where I got pregnant during our planned attempts to have a baby? The timeline where I was working 60-hour weeks while you were having an affair? David looked around desperately for support, but found none. His expensive lawyers were studying their phones intently, suddenly very interested in avoiding eye contact. Robert Sterling's team had taken a step back, recognizing that their careful damage control strategy had just exploded. Even Helen Matthews, who had spent the entire morning making excuses for David's behavior, looked horrified. "David," she whispered, "how could you think such a thing about Rebecca?" The baby kicked hard against Rebecca's ribs, as if responding to the stress and tension. But this time, instead of the anxiety she had felt for months, Rebecca felt something else entirely: righteous anger. "Every smile," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Every 'I love you.' Every time you felt him kick and pretended to be excited. It was all an act while you harbored this devastating doubt about my faithfulness?" She stepped closer to David, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. "You want to know what's really suspicious about the timeline?" she asked. "The fact that you got me pregnant right before you started your affair? Like you needed to secure your backup plan before you started shopping for my replacement?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. David opened his mouth to deny it, but Rebecca continued. "When did it start?" "David, the affair with Vanessa. Was it before or after you got me pregnant?" Silence stretched through the hallway. Other conversations had stopped entirely. Even the court personnel had paused to listen to the drama unfolding. David's silence was answer enough. Judge Hamilton appeared at the far end of the hallway, returning from whatever business had taken her away from chambers. She took in the scene with sharp eyes, Rebecca standing tall and calm, David pale and shaken, two sets of parents looking mortified, and a group of expensive consultants realizing their carefully laid plans had just collapsed. The judge approached slowly, her presence commanding attention without her having to speak. "Is there a problem here?" she asked quietly. Rebecca turned to face Judge Hamilton, and when she spoke, her voice carried the full weight of her legal training and her newfound determination. "No, Your Honor. No problem at all. Just a few things becoming clear that should have been clear months ago." Judge Hamilton nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. "And Mrs. Matthews, have you given any thought to our earlier conversation?" Rebecca looked around the hallway one more time, at the expensive lawyers and crisis managers trying to make her disappear, at the husband who had never trusted her and never would, at the future that stretched ahead of her, uncertain but finally her own. "Yes, Your Honor," she said clearly. "I accept the position." The judge smiled, and Rebecca felt something settle into place inside her chest, something that felt like coming home. Chapter 8. The Sterling Cleanup Crew. Robert Sterling watched the exchange between Rebecca and Judge Hamilton with the calculating gaze of a man who had spent decades reading situations and adjusting his strategies accordingly. When Judge Hamilton disappeared back toward her chambers, Sterling approached Rebecca with renewed purpose, but something had changed in his demeanor. The smooth confidence was still there, but underneath it was something that looked almost like respect. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, "I owe you an apology. My daughter's behavior today was inexcusable, and I'm not here to make excuses for her." His crisis team hovered behind him like expensive vultures, but Sterling waved them back with one hand. "I've spent the last hour listening to lawyers and publicists tell me how to make this problem disappear," he continued, "but standing here, watching you handle yourself with dignity while my daughter acted like a spoiled child, I realized something." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "This isn't a problem to be managed. This is a consequence that my daughter needs to face." Rebecca studied his face, looking for the catch. In her experience, wealthy men like Robert Sterling didn't suddenly develop consciences in courthouse hallways. "Mr. Sterling," she said slowly, "what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that Vanessa has spent her entire life believing that money and connections can fix any mistake, that there's always a way to buy her way out of consequences." His voice hardened. "Today, that stops." Behind him, His crisis management team exchanged alarmed glances. This was clearly not the strategy they had discussed. "Sir," one of his advisors stepped forward, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No," Sterling cut him off. "Mrs. Matthews, I'm not going to insult you by offering money to make this go away. My daughter assaulted you in open court, and she's going to face the legal consequences of that action." Rebecca felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She had been bracing for another attempt to buy her silence, another round of manipulation disguised as concern for everyone's well-being. "Why?" she asked simply. Sterling looked toward the courtroom where his daughter had been arrested just hours earlier. "Because 28 years ago, I married a woman who thought she could do whatever she wanted because her father had money. It took 3 years of marriage and a very expensive divorce to realize that entitled behavior doesn't improve with age." The breathing room scene arrived naturally. Rebecca excused herself to the courthouse bathroom, needing a moment to process everything that had happened. In the mirror, she saw the handprint on her cheek where Vanessa had slapped her. The skin was beginning to bruise, a purple shadow that would remind her of this day for weeks to come. But she also saw something else. Her own eyes, clear and determined for the first time in months. She splashed cold water on her face and really looked at herself. Still pregnant, still tired, still carrying the emotional weight of a marriage that had been built on lies, but no longer defeated. Maggie found her there, leaning against the bathroom counter. "How are you holding up, honey?" "Better than I expected," Rebecca said honestly. "Maggie, Sterling's team was talking numbers earlier. How big were the numbers?" "7 figures," Maggie said quietly. "They were prepared to offer 7 figures for a quiet settlement and a non-disclosure agreement." 7 figures. Enough money to set up her and the baby for life. Enough to disappear quietly and never have to see David or Vanessa again. "What do you think I should do?" Rebecca asked. Maggie leaned against the bathroom wall, studying her friend's face. "I think," she said carefully, "that you need to decide what justice looks like for you. Is it money? Is it seeing Vanessa face consequences? Or is it something else entirely?" Rebecca's validation whisper came out clear and strong. "I deserve more than hush money. I deserve better than being paid to disappear." "Then what do you want?" Rebecca thought about Judge Hamilton's offer, about the possibility of using her legal training to help other women navigate the system, about working in the very courthouse where she had been assaulted, but this time as an officer of the court rather than a victim. "I want to matter," she said finally. "I want my life to mean something beyond being David Matthews' wife or Robert Sterling's problem to solve." "Welcome." When they returned to the hallway, the scene had shifted again. David was in heated conversation with his father, while Helen Matthews sat crying quietly on the bench. The Sterling crisis team had retreated to a corner, their expensive suits and briefcases suddenly seeming out of place in the marble halls of justice. Robert Sterling approached Rebecca again, this time alone. "Mrs. Matthews, I have a daughter who needs to learn that actions have consequences. You have every right to pursue charges against her, and you have my support in doing so." "What about your team?" Rebecca gestured toward the crisis managers. "They're fired," Sterling said simply. "Some problems can't be solved with money and spin. Some problems require actually facing the truth." Rebecca's phone buzzed with another text. This time it was from Emily Walsh, the court reporter. "I wanted you to know that what happened today was completely unacceptable. If you need a witness statement, I saw everything." The message was followed by another from a bailiff she barely knew. "Ma'am, I just wanted you to know that woman's behavior was way out of line. Hope you're okay." Then another from a lawyer she had never met. "Saw what happened in court today. If you need any legal assistance, my firm would be happy to help pro bono." Rebecca stared at her phone as message after message appeared. Court personnel, other attorneys, even some of the reporters who had been in the gallery. All of them offering support. All of them recognizing that what had happened was wrong, regardless of money or connections or crisis management teams. She looked up to find Judge Hamilton approaching down the hallway, her black robes flowing behind her like wings. "Mrs. Matthews," the judge said, "I've spoken with the prosecutor's office. Given the public nature of the assault and the availability of witnesses, Miss Sterling will be formally charged. Her father's wealth is irrelevant to the legal process." Robert Sterling nodded approvingly. "As it should be, Your Honor." Judge Hamilton's eyes moved to David, who was still arguing with his father near the elevators. "Mr. Matthews," she called out. "A word." David approached reluctantly, his usual confident stride reduced to a nervous shuffle. "Your wife has just accepted a position as my judicial clerk," Judge Hamilton said quietly, "which means she'll be working in this courthouse every day. I trust that won't present any problems." David's eyes widened as the implication sank in. Rebecca would be here, in the building where his carefully constructed lies had been exposed, working for the judge who would be overseeing his divorce proceedings. "No problems, Your Honor," he managed to say. "Good," Judge Hamilton replied, "because if there are any problems, any attempts to interfere with Mrs. Matthews' work or create difficulties for her in this building, I will consider it contempt of court. Are we clear? Crystal clear, Your Honor." As Judge Hamilton walked away, David turned to Rebecca with something like desperation in his eyes. "Becca, please, we can work this out. Vanessa meant nothing to me. The paternity thing was just... I was confused, scared about becoming a father." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. The man she had married, the father of her child, the person who had let another woman assault her while carrying his baby. "David," she said quietly, "you're not the one who should be confused or scared. I've been the adult in this relationship for a long time." She turned to Judge Hamilton, who had paused near the courtroom doors. "Your Honor, when do I start?" The judge smiled, and Rebecca felt her new life beginning to take shape around her. "Monday morning, Mrs. Matthews, welcome to the team." Chapter 9. The Truth Unveiled. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn light that made everything look sharp and new. Rebecca stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of a navy blue dress that actually fit her 7 months pregnant body. She had found it at a maternity store over the weekend, spending money she probably should have saved, but needed to feel professional again. Her reflection showed a woman she barely recognized, not because of the pregnancy or the fading bruise on her cheek, but because of something in her eyes that hadn't been there in months. Purpose. The courthouse felt different when she entered as an employee rather than a victim. The same marble halls, the same imposing architecture, but now she belonged here. Emily Walsh waved from behind the information desk. 2 bailiffs she recognized from Friday's chaos nodded respectfully as she passed. Judge Hamilton's chambers were on the 3rd floor, accessible through a private entrance that bypassed the public areas. Rebecca found the judge already at her desk, reading through case files with the intense concentration she had come to associate with Patricia Hamilton. "Mrs. Matthews." The judge looked up with a smile. "Ready for your first day?" "More than ready, Your Honor." The morning flew by in a blur of case law, scheduling, and administrative tasks that reminded Rebecca why she had loved legal work in the first place. The intellectual challenge of analyzing complex family situations, the satisfaction of finding precedents that could help resolve disputes, the quiet dignity of working within a system that, despite its flaws, still aimed for justice. Around 11 o'clock, Judge Hamilton's secretary announced that there was a visitor. "Dr. Sarah Thompson is here to see Mrs. Matthews. She says it's important." Rebecca found her obstetrician waiting in the small conference room adjacent to the judge's chambers. Dr. Thompson looked nervous, her usually calm demeanor replaced by something that resembled anxiety. "Rebecca, thank you for seeing me. I know you're starting a new job today." "Of course. What's going on?" "Doctor." Thompson closed the door and sat across from Rebecca at the small conference table. "I've been thinking about our conversation on Friday, about David's request for a paternity test." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "There's something else I need to tell you." Rebecca's stomach clenched. "What do you mean David didn't just ask for a paternity test? He provided me with specific dates when he claimed you might have been unfaithful. Dates that corresponded to your business trips last spring?" The room felt suddenly cold. Rebecca remembered those trips clearly. The Chicago merger that had required round-the-clock work, the Portland client meeting that had stretched into multiple days of negotiations. He had details: Rebecca, hotel names, flight times. He had been tracking your movements. The words hit like physical blows. David hadn't just suspected her of infidelity. He had been investigating her, gathering evidence for a case he was building in his mind. But that's not the worst part, Dr. Thompson continued. He also provided me with medical records. What kind of medical records? Fertility records from a clinic in Seattle. Records showing that David had been having fertility issues for over a year. Rebecca's mind reeled. They had been trying to get pregnant for 2 years. 2 years of carefully timed cycles, of temperature charts and ovulation kits. 2 years of David assuring her that they just needed to be patient. The records showed that his sperm count was significantly low enough that natural conception would be extremely difficult without medical intervention. The room seemed to spin slightly. Rebecca gripped the edge of the conference table for support. He knew he was unlikely to father a child naturally, but he never told you. So when you got pregnant, he immediately assumed you must have been unfaithful. The final piece of David's deception clicked into place. He had known about his fertility issues but had kept it secret. When she miraculously conceived despite his condition, instead of being grateful for what must have been a medical anomaly, he had accused her of infidelity. Dr. Thompson, why are you telling me this now? Because that man put you through months of emotional torture based on his own lies. And because, she hesitated, because I think you deserve to know that your pregnancy really was a miracle. The odds of natural conception given David's condition were less than 5%. Rebecca placed both hands on her belly, feeling her son moving restlessly inside her. A 5% chance. A miracle baby that David had treated as evidence of her betrayal. There's one more thing, Dr. Thompson said quietly. The fertility clinic records show that David was exploring IVF options, but not with you. The female partner listed on his intake forms was Vanessa Sterling. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Rebecca felt oddly calm. David hadn't just been having an affair. He had been planning a replacement family while pretending to work on having children with his wife. How long have you known this? Rebecca asked. I received the records last week when David's lawyer contacted me about potential testimony. I think they wanted me to support their claims about your mental state. But when I saw what was in the file, Dr. Thompson shook her head. I couldn't be party to that level of deception. Rebecca stood slowly, walking to the conference room window that overlooked the courthouse parking lot. Below, she could see people hurrying about their daily business, unaware that her understanding of the last 2 years had just been completely rewritten. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. David's lawyer just called. They want to schedule a settlement conference. Apparently, they're very motivated to resolve things quickly. Of course they were. David's secret about his fertility issues was the kind of ammunition that could destroy his carefully constructed narrative about Rebecca's mental instability. If it came out that he had been lying about his medical condition while accusing her of infidelity, his credibility would be shattered. Dr. Thompson, Rebecca said, turning back to face her doctor, would you be willing to testify about what David told you, about the paternity test request and the fertility records? Absolutely. What that man did to you was unconscionable. Rebecca returned to Judge Hamilton's chambers with a clarity she hadn't experienced in months. The judge looked up from her case files, immediately noticing the change in Rebecca's demeanor. Everything all right? Your Honor, I just learned something that changes everything about my divorce case. My husband has been lying about his medical condition while accusing me of infidelity. Judge Hamilton set down her papers and gave Rebecca her full attention. What kind of medical condition? Rebecca explained what Dr. Thompson had told her about David's fertility issues, his secret investigation of her business trips, his plans for IVF with his mistress. With each revelation, Judge Hamilton's expression grew harder. Mrs. Matthews, this information needs to be shared with your attorney immediately. This level of deception goes beyond simple marital infidelity. I know, but Your Honor, I need to ask you something. If this information comes out in court, if David's lies are exposed publicly, it could affect our working relationship here. Judge Hamilton considered this for a moment. Mrs. Matthews, when I offered you this position, I did so because I recognized your legal skills and your character. Your personal situation, however it resolves, doesn't change those qualities. She paused. If anything, what you've endured and how you've handled it convinces me that you're exactly the kind of person who should be working in family court. Rebecca felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she belonged. Her phone rang. Maggie's name appeared on the screen. "I have to take this," Rebecca said. "Rebecca, where are you? David's whole legal team just showed up at my office. They're talking about a very generous settlement offer, but they want to meet today, right now." Rebecca looked out the window of Judge Hamilton's chambers, toward the parking lot where she had sat in her car just days ago, and afraid to face the future. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour," she said. "And Maggie, we're not just negotiating a divorce settlement anymore. We're negotiating justice." As she gathered her things to leave, Judge Hamilton called out to her, "Mrs. Matthews, when you go into that meeting, remember something. You're not just David's wife anymore. You're not just a victim. You're a legal professional with the full weight of the law behind you." Rebecca nodded, understanding completely. For the first time in months, she was going into battle as an equal. Chapter 10. Justice served. The conference room at Maggie's law firm buzzed with nervous energy. David sat at one end of the polished table, flanked by his legal team of 3. His usual confidence had been replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Across from him, Rebecca took her seat next to Maggie, her hands folded calmly over her pregnant belly. The contrast was striking. David's side of the table was cluttered with briefcases, tablets, and stacks of documents. Rebecca's side was nearly empty except for a single manila folder that Maggie had placed in front of her. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," David's lead attorney began. "My client is very motivated to reach an amicable resolution that serves everyone's interests." Amicable resolution. Rebecca almost smiled at the euphemism. 3 days ago, these same lawyers had been trying to paint her as mentally unstable. Now they wanted to be amicable. "Mr. Matthews has prepared a very generous settlement offer," the lawyer continued, sliding a document across the table. "Full custody to Mrs. Matthews, of course, substantial child support, a lump sum payment for any emotional distress, and a very comfortable ongoing alimony arrangement." Maggie picked up the document and scanned it quickly. Her eyebrows rose as she read the numbers. "This is substantial," she said carefully. "We believe it reflects Mr. Matthews' commitment to ensuring his family's well-being," the lawyer replied. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, studying David's face. He was staring at his hands, unable to meet her eyes. The man who had commanded boardrooms and closed million-dollar deals couldn't look at his pregnant wife. "There is one small condition," the lawyer added, almost as an afterthought. Of course there was. A non-disclosure agreement, nothing excessive, just an understanding that the details of the marriage and divorce proceedings remain private. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her stomach. Even now, even after everything that had happened, they were trying to buy her silence. "You want me to sign a non-disclosure agreement?" she said quietly. "It's standard in these types of high-profile divorces," the lawyer assured her, "just to protect everyone's privacy." Rebecca looked around the table, at David, who still couldn't meet her eyes, at his lawyers, who were probably being paid more per hour than most people made in a month, at the carefully crafted settlement offer that was designed to make her disappear quietly. "Maggie," she said, "could I see that manila folder?" Maggie slid the folder across the table. Rebecca opened it slowly, revealing the medical records that Dr. Thompson had provided that morning. David's fertility test results, his secret IVF consultations with Vanessa Sterling, documentation of his lies about his medical condition while he accused Rebecca of infidelity. David's face went white as he recognized what she was holding. "Gentlemen," Rebecca said, her voice carrying clearly through the conference room, "before we discuss any settlement, there are some facts we need to address." She began reading from the medical records. David's sperm count results, the dates of his fertility consultations, the IVF intake forms listing Vanessa Sterling as his intended partner. With each revelation, David's legal team grew quieter. The confident posturing disappeared, replaced by the grim realization that their client's credibility was evaporating in real time. "So you see," Rebecca concluded, "my husband spent months accusing me of mental instability and infidelity, while he was the one lying about his medical condition and planning a replacement family." The silence in the conference room was deafening. "Mrs. Matthews," David's lawyer said carefully, "surely we can discuss this privately." No, Rebecca replied. I'm done with private discussions. I'm done with being told to keep quiet for everyone else's comfort. She turned to face David directly. For the first time in the meeting, he looked up and met her eyes. David, do you remember what you said to me when I told you I was pregnant? He didn't answer. You said perfect timing, but you already knew about your fertility issues. You knew the chances of natural conception were less than 5%. Instead of being grateful for a miracle, you assumed I had been unfaithful. David's voice was barely a whisper. Becca, I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that you might actually have to be a father. Scared that your backup plan with Vanessa might be complicated by an inconvenient pregnancy? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? David, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you spent our entire marriage planning your exit strategy. The transformed power layer was fully operational now. Rebecca was no longer the woman who had sat in her car in the courthouse parking lot, afraid to face the future. She was no longer the victim who could be bought off with money and non-disclosure agreements. She was the woman who had chosen justice over convenience, who had chosen dignity over destruction, who had chosen herself. The settlement offer is generous, she said, sliding the document back across the table. But it comes with conditions I can't accept. Mrs. Matthews, David's lawyer tried again. Surely we can reach an understanding that works for everyone. Here's my understanding, Rebecca replied. David lied about his medical condition while accusing me of infidelity. He planned a replacement family while pretending to work on having children with his wife. He allowed his mistress to assault me in open court while I was carrying his child. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. So no, I will not sign a non-disclosure agreement. I will not be paid to disappear quietly, and I will not pretend that any of this was acceptable behavior from a husband and father. David finally found his voice. Becca, please, think about the baby. Think about what's best for our family. I'm thinking about the baby, Rebecca replied. I'm thinking about what kind of world I want to bring him into. A world where actions have consequences, where women don't have to accept abuse in silence, where justice matters more than money. She stood slowly, her hand resting on her belly where the baby kicked against her palm. David, you want to know what's best for our family? What's best is for our son to grow up knowing that his mother chose dignity over dollars, that she stood up for herself when everyone else told her to sit down and shut up. The final validation whisper came out clear and strong. I'm not the one who should be confused or scared. I've been the adult in this relationship for a long time. David's lead attorney made one last attempt. Mrs. Matthews, if you refuse this settlement and choose to litigate, these proceedings will become public record. Everyone will know the details of your marriage. Good, Rebecca said simply. Let everyone know. Let them know that David Matthews is the kind of man who lies about his fertility while accusing his pregnant wife of infidelity. Let them know that he's the kind of father who doubts his own child's parentage. Let them know that he's the kind of husband who allows his mistress to assault his wife in court. She gathered her purse and stood to leave. Maggie, I'll accept the financial terms of the settlement, full custody, child support, and reasonable alimony, but no non-disclosure agreement, no conditions, no buying my silence. As she reached the door, she turned back to face David one last time. You know what the really sad part is? Our son was a miracle, a 5% chance that somehow happened despite everything working against it. Instead of celebrating that miracle, you treated it as evidence of my betrayal. She paused, her hand on the door handle. I hope someday you realize what you lost. Not just me, but the chance to be the kind of man your son could be proud of. 6 weeks later, Rebecca sat at her desk in Judge Hamilton's chambers, 7 months pregnant and reviewing case files for the afternoon's hearings. Through her window, she could see the courthouse parking lot where she used to sit in her car, afraid to face the day. The irony was not lost on her. She was working in the same building where Vanessa Sterling had assaulted her. But now she was part of the system that ensured justice was served. Every day, she helped other women navigate family court proceedings, offering the kind of understanding that could only come from personal experience. Vanessa Sterling had received 6 months of community service and mandatory anger management classes. Her assault charge would remain on her permanent record, a reminder that money couldn't always buy absolution. David was living in a downtown condo, paying substantial child support and alimony. He would have supervised visitation rights once the baby was born, but Rebecca had insisted on psychological evaluation first. A man who doubted his own child's parentage needed to prove he was ready to be a father. The divorce had indeed become public record, just as his lawyers had warned. The local media had covered the story extensively, painting David as the unfaithful husband who allowed his mistress to assault his pregnant wife. His tech company's stock had taken a hit, and several major clients had quietly ended their contracts. But the real victory wasn't in David's consequences. It was in the woman Rebecca had become. Judge Hamilton knocked and entered, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and the afternoon's case files. "How are you feeling, Rebecca?" the judge asked. She had long since dropped the formal titles when they were alone in chambers. "Like I'm exactly where I belong," Rebecca replied honestly. "Good, because I have something to tell you. The State Bar Association has approved your application for the Family Law Certification Program. You can start classes next month if you want to." Rebecca's heart leaped. She had been thinking about specializing in family law, but hadn't dared hope it could happen so quickly. "Are you sure I'm ready for that? Rebecca, in the 6 weeks you've been working here, you've helped more women understand their rights than some lawyers do in years. You have a gift for making complex legal concepts understandable to people who are going through the worst time of their lives." Judge Hamilton sat down across from Rebecca's desk. "You know what sets you apart. You've been where they are. You understand what it feels like to have your whole world crumble while lawyers argue about assets and custody schedules. That experience makes you invaluable." Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Thompson. "Ultrasound appointment reminder for tomorrow at 10 a.m. Baby boy is measuring perfectly healthy." Baby boy, her son, who would grow up knowing that his mother had chosen strength over silence, that she had refused to be bought off or intimidated into disappearing. "Judge Hamilton," Rebecca said, "there's something I want to ask you. What's that? When you offered me this job, was it because you felt sorry for me because of what happened with Vanessa?" Judge Hamilton leaned back in her chair, considering the question seriously. "Rebecca, I've been on the bench for 23 years. In that time, I've seen hundreds of women go through what you went through. Some of them crumble under the pressure. Some of them take the money and disappear. Some of them become bitter and vindictive." She paused, her eyes meeting Rebecca's directly. "But very few of them do what you did. Very few of them stand up in that moment and choose justice over convenience, choose dignity over dollars, choose to become part of the solution instead of just another victim." Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of recognition and validation. "I offered you this job because I saw in you exactly what family court needs. Someone who understands that behind every case file is a real person going through the worst time of their life. Someone who won't let money and connections override what's right." The baby kicked hard against Rebecca's ribs, as if he too approved of the direction her life had taken. "There's something else," Judge Hamilton continued. "I've been talking to the Chief Justice about creating a new position, a family court advocate who would work specifically with women going through high-conflict divorces, someone who could help them understand their rights and navigate the system." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "What kind of position?" "The kind that would let you help women like you used to be. Women who are being told they're crazy or unstable. Women whose husbands are using money and lawyers to intimidate them into silence." The circular ending was perfect. Rebecca would be working in the same courthouse where her lowest moment had occurred, but now she would be the one helping other women find their strength. "I'm interested," she said simply. "I thought you might be." Judge Hamilton smiled. "The position would start after your maternity leave, assuming, of course, that you're interested in changing the system from the inside." Rebecca looked out her window one more time, toward the parking spot where she used to sit paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. A young woman was sitting in a car there now, clearly gathering courage for whatever legal battle waited for her inside. "Judge Hamilton," Rebecca said, "I've never been more interested in anything in my life." 3 months later, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him James, after David's father, who had been the only member of the Matthews family to consistently support her throughout the divorce proceedings. David attended the birth, but as a visitor rather than a partner. He held his son for exactly 7 minutes before Rebecca's mother firmly but politely suggested he leave. 6 months after that, Rebecca returned to work as the courthouse's first-ever family court advocate. Her job was to help women understand their rights, connect them with resources, and ensure that money and intimidation tactics didn't override justice. On her first day back, she found a note on her desk from Emily Walsh, the court reporter. "Thank you for showing us what courage looks like." But the real measure of Rebecca's transformation came on a Tuesday morning in late fall, almost exactly 1 year after Vanessa Sterling had slapped her in Judge Hamilton's courtroom. Rebecca was meeting with a new client, a young woman whose husband was claiming she was mentally unstable due to postpartum depression. The woman sat in Rebecca's office, tears streaming down her face, convinced that she was going to lose her children. "He says I'm crazy," the woman whispered. "He says no judge will give custody to a mother who needs antidepressants." Rebecca leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Listen to me very carefully. You are not crazy. You are having a normal response to an abnormal situation, and there are laws in place to protect mothers from exactly this kind of manipulation." She spent the next hour explaining the woman's rights, connecting her with a therapist who specialized in postpartum issues, and helping her understand that seeking help for depression was a sign of strength, not weakness. As the woman left, visibly stronger and more hopeful than when she had arrived, Rebecca felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what justice looked like, not revenge or punishment, but protection for those who needed it most. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. "Saw the news story about your advocacy program. Proud of you. Girl, you're changing lives." Rebecca smiled and picked up the next case file. A woman whose husband was hiding assets in offshore accounts. A mother whose ex was using their children as weapons in a custody battle. A pregnant wife whose husband was claiming the baby wasn't his. Stories that were different in detail but identical in their core. Women who needed someone to believe them, support them, and help them navigate a system that too often favored money over justice. Rebecca had found her calling in the very place where she had experienced her lowest moment. She was no longer the woman who sat in her car afraid to face the future. She was the woman who helped other women find the courage to face theirs. The baby kicked in his crib in the corner of her office, and Rebecca smiled. "Don't worry, little one," she whispered. "Mama's got this. And now, so do they." Justice, she had learned, wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about ensuring that everyone had someone in their corner when the world seemed stacked against them. It was about making sure that dignity always defeated dollars, that truth always triumphed over manipulation, and that courage was always contagious. Most importantly, it was about showing other women that they didn't have to accept less than they deserved simply because someone told them to. Rebecca Matthews had found her voice in a courthouse hallway, and now she was teaching other women to find theirs. That, she realized, was the sweetest justice of all. If Rebecca's story moved you, if it made you think about the power of choosing dignity over dollars, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between what was easy and what was right? This story reminds us that sometimes our worst moments become our greatest opportunities for growth. If you believe in the power of standing up for yourself, even when everyone tells you to sit down and stay quiet, please give this video a thumbs up. And if you know someone who needs to hear Rebecca's story, someone who might be going through their own difficult time and needs a reminder of their own strength, please share this with them. Sometimes we all need to remember that we're more resilient than we think. For more stories about real people facing impossible choices and finding their courage, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because everyone deserves to hear stories that remind them they're not alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to Rebecca's journey. Remember, your story matters too, and you're stronger than you know. Until next time, keep choosing courage over comfort and dignity over dollars.